Today, I will be talking about Selma, the movie which was released in 2014, and Exodus, the book from the Old Testament. I will be talking about the similarities between the two and also them individually. Selma is a movie that was released in 2014, which is a retelling of events that happened in Selma, Alabama in 1965. The movie Selma shows viewers the events leading up to the march from Selma to Montgomery, as well as the two attempts that were made by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers in order to cross the bridge that led out of Selma. In the beginning of the movie, we see the character Alice Lee Cooper, who is played by Oprah Winfrey, trying to register to vote in the upcoming election. Alice Lee Cooper has been denied the right to vote multiple times before because of the color of her skin and her gender. The clerk asked Annie Lee Cooper to state the preamble to the Constitution, as well as the county judges that are in Alabama and their names. After asking her these questions, he still denies her the right to vote. After this event happens, the movie shows us what is occurring in Selma, Alabama. We see the beatings and the hardships that the black community in Selma, Alabama is facing every day. We are then shown the planning and meetings that went into the march from Selma to Montgomery, and it also shows us the attempts made to walk over the bridge. In the movie, we see this attempted twice. The first is stopped by the Selma police, who used brute force to stop the marchers from crossing the bridge out of town, and the second time we see the marchers once again trying to cross the bridge, but this time joined by people of different races and religions. In Exodus, beginning from chapter 8, we are shown God's work and his plan to work through Moses in order to free his people from Pharaoh's grasp. Exodus talks about Moses and his journey to lead the Israelites out of Egypt into the Promised Land. Exodus chapter 8 starts off with God telling Moses to go to Pharaoh and tell him this: "Let my people go so that they may worship me." God then proceeds to tell Moses of the curses that Pharaoh and his followers will have to face if he does not let people go. These are known as the 10 plagues of Egypt, which first starts off with turning the water into blood, then followed by frogs, gnats, flies, disease on their livestock, unhealable boils, hail and fire, locusts, darkness, and death of a firstborn. As a result of Pharaoh's unwillingness to let God's people go, we see all 10 plagues executed throughout the book of Exodus. Finally, in Exodus chapter 13, we see Pharaoh allow God's people to leave Egypt and his rule. Once Pharaoh let God's people free, God did not decide to send them to the Promised Land through the Philistine country, which would be the easiest way. He decided to send them on a more challenging journey. God told Moses if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt, Exodus 13. God told Moses to take this path to see the trust that his people had in him. He wanted to know if his people would put all their faith into him 100%. Selma the movie and Exodus share many similarities, one of which is that they both share a leader who their followers look up to in order to help them through their tough times. In Exodus, these leaders are God and Moses, who work together to free their people from Egypt and the grasp of Pharaoh's oppressive rule. In Selma, this leader is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who works alongside his fellow brothers and sisters in order to allow black Southerners the opportunity to vote and experience full freedom from the grasp of oppression. Another similarity they both share is that both leaders led their followers on a journey to reach their freedom. In Exodus, we see Moses leading the Israelites across the desert into the Promised Land as God told them. In Selma, we see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. leading his followers across the bridge out of Selma in order to protest their right to vote as well as their freedom. In both Selma and Exodus, the leaders as well as their followers were teased once before they were fully allowed to leave. In Selma, the marchers marched once but were stopped by cops who told them, "You are not allowed to march today." In Exodus, Moses was about to leave with his people when Pharaoh told him he could only leave with the men, and after Moses refused to leave with only the men and leave the women and children behind, Pharaoh told him to leave alone without any of the Israelites. In today's world, we are still seeing instances where leaders are working to get others out of tough and hurtful situations. One example of this is Pink Door Berlin, which is an organization that works to get women and children out of the sex industry. This organization aims to help women leave the industry and start a new life once again. Another example of people starting the journey into freedom is Strip Love. Strip Love began in 2010 and is run by Dr. Kimberly Majeski. This is an organization that helps women in the sex industry, and Strip Love also works to build relationships with the women in order to help them choose love and freedom over the industry. In our world, there are still people trying to escape from situations where they feel oppressed, enslaved, or entrapped. Although the March on Selma and the Journey to the Promised Land are in the past, missions such as Pink Door and Strip Love are currently happening. The people of Selma walked to Montgomery, Alabama because they wanted freedom from oppression. The people in Egypt walked to the freedom of the Promised Land because they wanted out of slavery. The people at Pink Door and Strip Love are making a way for women to walk out of sexual slavery and into freedom. Selma and the Book of Exodus are just two examples of where modern-day media and works such as the Bible synthesize with one another. Although they both faced hardships and their goals were different, they shared many similarities. Whether it be a leader who is working to help his people or a journey that contains many obstacles. Both Selma the movie, which was released in 2014, and Exodus, a chapter from the Old Testament, contain leaders who are working towards a future where their people are safe and free. Even though the events such as the Selma March and the Journey to the Promised Land are in the past, the fight for freedom still exists in our modern world, as far away as Berlin and as close as our local communities.